Today, we are joined by the extraordinary Rachel Korb, an ICF certified coach, the founder of Nervous System Mastery for Women, and a global leader who has guided women across 41 nationalities towards healthier, more aligned ways of living and leading. Her story is both powerful and deeply human. Burnout, misalignment, and a wake up call that forced her to confront a framework built for a body she did not inhabit. Rachel's mission is revolutionary, yet simple. Women don't need to push harder, they need to understand and honor the biology that shapes their capacity. Tonight, we explore how nervous system regulation can become a woman's greatest advantage. Welcome to the show, Rachel. It's such an honor to have you.
Thank you for having me, Anya. I'm really excited.
Mhm. And Rachel, many women feel like they're constantly lagging behind or failing to keep up. What core misconception about productivity and biology do you think traps them the most?
I love this question. So we live in a system that isn't designed for us. And I can expound on that a little bit. When we look at it through a scientific lens, men operate on a 24-hour cycle, the circadian rhythm. Women who are at reproductive age operate on that rhythm as well as a roughly 28-day rhythm, which is called the infradian rhythm, or where our menstrual cycle really shows up. And so when we think about this through the lens of energy, of our hormones, of our nervous system, we don't have the same day like our male counterparts have, or maybe women who are already through menopause. We have our daily cycle, but then we also have our monthly cycle. And so we can't show up the same way day after day because every day is different for us through that monthly cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's so fascinating. Also, was there a moment in your own burnout journey when this misconception became undeniably clear?
It's a really good question. Honestly, so when I went through the process for a long time, I just ignored the idea of energy and productivity. Well, I didn't ignore productivity. I was obsessed with productivity and how could I be as efficient as possible and get as much done and with really high quality output. And so it took 3 cycles of burnout for me to really realize it. And when I hit the third cycle of burnout, I had intestinal bleeding, I had a case of shingles, I had high functioning anxiety, I had insomnia. And I was like, this can't be the way. And I had been studying different practices around mindfulness, nervous system regulation, somatics for 20 years, but I was really missing this key component of what about my physiology? How is it different? And so I remember the night very specifically. It was my birthday and it was like 3 in the morning and I was laying awake with insomnia thinking, this can't be it. How like I've achieved everything I want, but I'm in a horrible state. I can't continue this way. And that's what really led me on this journey of diving much more deeply into the female physiology and how our experiences are different beyond the social expectations that also exist for us. But really the physiological state showed up there because my body was telling me, hey, I can't do this anymore. This is not sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also your perspective here opens an essential truth that misalignment is often systematic, not personal, and that awareness alone can offer women profound relief.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the thing when I work with my private coaching clients is when we start talking about this topic, one, they realize, oh, I'm not alone. I thought it was just me. I thought there was something wrong with me. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with you. Your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's just maladaptive responses because of the system that you're in. And two, it's okay. And so it really opens up this thing where women can accept what's going on, but also to give themselves permission to opt out of the system that we live in, right? There are still requirements how our work days work, 9 to 5. That's based on a circadian rhythm. That's tough, but we can still look at how do I shift the way that I show up at work and when I focus on different aspects of my work during my month to help to help support me in that. And so I think it's something that's very invisible, but it's very pervasive in probably, if not all, most women's lives.
Yes, 100%. And you talk about women being conditioned into a 24-hour rhythm instead of a 28-day cycle.
Hmm.
How does this misalignment show up in daily emotional or physical regulation?
Do you mean throughout the month or more specifically each day?
Each day.
Yeah. So when we think about this, I mean, for a woman, it's going to change throughout the month. So not each day will be the same. Um, maybe I'll expand if it's okay out to the 28-day cycle. So then we can talk about how that shows up in the day to day. So when we think of the monthly cycle, we have the 4 phases, right? We have follicular, which is the beginning of our cycle. We have ovulation, when the egg drops. We have luteal, leading up to the bleeding, and then we have actual menstruation or the bleeding. And so in the first half, from follicular to ovulation, when we look at it through a nervous system lens, women's nervous systems are more flexible. What that means is we are able to regulate ourselves. And so have you heard of the window of tolerance before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so I'll explain that because it'll make a lot more sense. So we have this thing called the window of tolerance. When we are inside the window of tolerance, this is where we have connection or social engagement. These are moments where we feel present, we feel curious, we feel joyful. This is where we can respond to the ebbs and flows of life in a way that's regulated, where we feel more calm, where we can be responsive and not reactive. So that's where we wanna spend most of our time. It's easier to spend our time there during the first half of our cycle. Pardon me. And then we move into above and below the window of tolerance. So above the window of tolerance is fight or flight. This can also manifest as tend or befriend for women because of how we are socially programmed, but essentially the same thing is happening at a nervous system level. This is where we feel anxiety, we might feel overwhelmed, racing thoughts. We tend to have binary thinking as well. This is where we're reactive, right? We're running away from something or we're running towards to fight something. And so our nervous system can handle this for short sprints, but not in a prolonged way. If we drop below the window of tolerance, we move into freeze or shutdown. So this is when the nervous system is saying, oh no, there's no way I can fight or flee. I need to play dead. So our nervous system is going into into protection mode. This is where we may feel withdrawn, where we may feel foggy or numb. This is where depression can also show up. So when we think about this through the lens of the 28 days, that first half, we can spend a lot more time in this connection, this middle state inside the window of tolerance. We can, throughout any given day, we'll move across these 3 different states of the nervous system, but we can come back. After we ovulate and we move into the luteal window, which is sometimes called the luteal vulnerability window when we think about the nervous system, our nervous system struggles to come back and stay in the window of tolerance more easily. So we may find that we're dysregulated more in fight or flight or freeze or shutdown. What does that mean for our nervous system? That means that we have chronic stress on the nervous system. It's hard to reestablish homeostasis in the body. But also, this is where emotions come up. It's harder for us to be responsive because our nervous system is in a more reactive state. This is why that, like, where people be like, "Oh, you're being too sensitive or you're being emotional." It's because our nervous system can't facilitate that, especially if we're not caring for it. When we do care for it, we can be more emotionally responsive, but it's still something that when we're in this luteal phase, it does impact our ability for our emotions to be regulated. And this ties into 2 parts of the brain, so the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So both of these, we see a decrease in the functioning of the prefrontal cortex, and then we see an increase in the amygdala being activated. And so our body is really operating in a much different way. So when we think about it in the day to day is going to show up differently depending where we are in our cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And that also brings a refreshing nuance to the conversation about well being, reminding us that capacity isn't constant and that honoring fluctuations is a strength.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the beauty of when we think about how do I design a life in alignment with my monthly cycle and care for my nervous system in that way, it unlocks a lot more. And so when we see the actual impact of that in the day to day, it is feeling more emotionally regulated. It's having less PMS symptoms. It's being able to have more sustainable energy because we're moving with the energy ebbs and flows that we have versus requiring the same amount of energy every day. And so what I've seen with my clients and even what we've learned through research is that when we can really tap into this and we can design our lifestyle in a different way than what has been prescribed to us, right? i.e. the 24-hour schedule, it unlocks a completely different way of experiencing the world and how we feel in this world.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And burnout has become almost a badge of honor in high achieving spaces. Why do you think women, especially, hit burnout so intensely and unexpectedly?
So I think that's a really complex question to answer. I think there's the 2 pieces, right? One is more of the societal piece of the conditioning that we have as on women, what's expected of us as women that that maybe you don't see in men in terms of the amount of work that we take on inside the household, outside of the household, the invisible or emotional work that we also do, um, and just a lot of the systemic barriers that we have to confront every single day. And when you also think about it through the lens of trauma, which heavily impacts the size of our window of tolerance, our ability to stay regulated, a lot of it is driven by our childhood experiences as well as trauma, and over half of women experience trauma, some kind of abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual. And so we're starting potentially, not everyone, of course, with a window of tolerance that might be smaller. So we already are in a space where it takes less stress to push us out into this fight or flight, the hyperarousal, or into the hypoarousal, our freezer shutdown. So that's one side of it that I see. The other side of it is more so around how we actually design the way that we work when we think about burnout. So have you heard of the term allostatic load before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, cool. So
Mhm.
I'll explain it so everyone can understand, of course. So allostatic load is essentially the wear and tear that we have on the body. So, when our body is in its natural state, in homeostasis, this is what enables us to digest, to sleep properly, right? All of our functions are functioning as they should in their ideal state. But when we're experiencing chronic stress, especially chronic stress, this is where burnout shows up because our body is not able to go back and recover. And so, as we stay in this chronic stress state, for a longer period of time, our allostatic load increases. We age faster on a cellular level, and we're really not able to go back in and recover what we need for the energy for the body, right? So this impacts our hormone production. So the amount of estrogen and progesterone, especially for women, which is what can lead to different hormonal disorders that we have. It impacts our ability for sleep. Sleep is one of the biggest factors in nervous system regulation. So when we think of that window of tolerance again, so we have a baseline based on our early experiences in life, but also the day to day based on sleep, nutrition, hydration. And so if we're not sleeping effectively, that also stresses the nervous system even more. And so we start to get this compounding effect, right? Hormonal imbalance, lack of sleep, so the body can't function. the body can't enter into a state to actually recover and rest so that it can start to shift back into the direction it needs to go. And so I really see there's kind of the two pieces, and they're very interconnected. There's more the social, systemic piece of what we experience, but the other is what's happening on the physiological level and how when we're showing up in our day to day, we're actually not doing the things that can help bring the body back into a regulated state or even a state where we can recover so we can continue to move forward.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And in your coaching work, is there a commonly early warning sign women often overlook?
Ooh, I'd say there's actually quite a few. Um, so one that I see a lot with women is they're quite disconnected from their bodies. They're very connected, but disconnected. So women tend to experience physical sensations more than men. From this is anecdotally from working with my clients. And so they're very aware of like where they hold tension, where they feel that stress, where they're contracting. But a lot of them override it, right? I just need to push through. I just need to finish this project. I just need to go do this errand. I just need to get food for my kid. And so they're never slowing down and they're not actually listening to what's happening in the body because the body is communicating something. And so I'd say that's probably one of the most common I see is there's overriding of sensations that are indicating, hey, something's off. We need to pause for a moment. Um, or in once they've lived with that long enough, some of them just completely disconnect from the body. So it has to get really bad where they're having migraines to even acknowledge something is wrong. The other I'd say there's another one that's really big that I see with women is distraction. So when they're normally this is when you're going into like the freezer shutdown state they're scrolling on social for a long time, binge watching TV, self-soothing with drink or food, um, because they don't sit with what's going on in the body, and we haven't even touched on this, but really, like, we're starting to connect what's happening physiologically with the emotional response and how those 2 are interconnected. So when we can sit with the emotions, express them in a healthy way, and release them, this also is something that can activate our vagus nerve, which is what helps regulate the nervous system. So I really see these 2 as really common experiences with my clients.
Yeah, and it's powerful how subtle cues, when ignored, can escalate into physical breakdown. And your insight can help listeners catch the signals far earlier.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, and I think maybe one other one I wanna add in that I see as a signal is I work I feel like I have a very specific DNA of client who comes to me, and it's women who have been very successful, especially from a professional lens. And with that, part of the power is they're really good at what they do, and they care deeply about what they do. But when we go deeper, we also see that there is a lot of inner critic, a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of pressure to, I'd say, with perfectionist tendencies. And there's very little self-compassion. And self-compassion is also a really important element of regulating your nervous system. And so I'd say that's another one that shows up a lot with my clients is with high performers in general. This is another indicator I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, somatic and mindfulness have been part of your life for years. What shifted when you started treating these practices as essential rather than optional?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think initially there was resistance, to be honest, because it's like, oh, I want to do something instead of be, right? Like when you think about mindfulness and somatics, I'd say it's more of a being experience rather than a doing experience. And so I knew I needed it, but there was resistance and it took time. But what really shifted when I started to consistently practice it. And the huge unlock for me was I'd say for the first 10 years, I forced myself into very rigid practices, maybe masculine, we could say, in terms of kind of that like forced push, it's got to be hard, very rigid, strict rules. And at some point I was like, I this isn't working for me. And so what I started to do to make it actually feel good was how can I make these smaller bite-sized chunks? How can I incorporate them into things that I'm already doing? And how can I do it in a way that feels good? So I would actually pause and ask myself, like, what do I need in this moment? So sometimes it was breath work, sometimes it's movement, sometimes it's sitting and doing something I call somatic sensing. Um, but really that shift of it's gotta be 30 minutes practice minimum, I can't move while I'm sitting and practicing mindfulness to I can move if I need to, but I'll be aware of the fact that I'm moving. Or as I'm taking a shower, I can hum because that's something I'm already doing every day, and that helps with activating the vagus nerve, which is what helps regulate us. So I really feel like the shift came from how about we go from like very rigid, like you're supposed to do it this way to a more intentional way that works for me. And one other piece I'll add to that is realizing that at different phases of my menstrual cycle, I also have different practices. I don't use the same practices in the first half that I use in the second half because I need a different response depending on where my body is and where my nervous system is.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And do you think women struggle to give themselves permission to rest or regulate?
100%. I think there's a lot of pressure of if I'm not being productive, I'm not being valuable to society. So when we do the work that we're doing, I'm asking people to slow down and sometimes stop. And I think that can be really, really hard because we're just taught like we always need to be in this production mode. This is how we how we gain our worth, our self-value, or pardon me, our self-worth, our value. And so working with women, the first step is helping them give themselves permission. And honestly, what I found that has worked the best with the women I work with is explaining the physiology. Because when they realize, hey, my body's doing exactly what it is, it gives them naturally a permission to say, I do need to slow down here. If I don't, I'm actually damaging my nervous system more or throwing off my hormones more. And so I'd say that's such a big piece. Self-compassion is a deeper one that we go into, but I'd say the initial is just really understanding how our bodies work because everything we've learned tends to be around male physiology, and that just doesn't apply to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely agree. And that also touches on a cultural tension where rest is moralized and self care becomes performative instead of
Mm.
physiological.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's something I've thought a lot about of the performative piece, right? Because the way that we're raised in many places in the world is our worth, our value is through performance, right? When you think of in school, the grades you get if you get good grades, it's this gives you access to more in the world. So we're always kind of getting this carrot of like if you perform well, you get more. And so there's a really critical piece of understanding when am I performing versus when am I actually listening to myself. And I think it's something that takes time because these are patterns that are deeply ingrained in our behavior that we don't think about on a conscious level a lot of the time. It took me a long time to really realize, even so, I used to work in people and culture as a senior leader at startups. And when you think about performance reviews, those are performative. When you think about promotions, all performative. And so we're used to always being given some kind of prize or positive outcome based on performance. And the thing I see also with a lot of high performing women is when it comes to celebrations or accomplishments, for them, it has to have some kind of accolade. And so we really start to slow down and say, "Hey, what could be a smaller version of a celebration? What's like a small thing I've had for myself today?" So going back to self-care, right? Like taking a moment to listen to myself and what I really need, that's a celebration. That doesn't have to be performative. It's actually showing up for myself. Because if I can't show up for myself, I can't show up for others. And so I think it's kind of complex, but I think there's a lot to be said around how do we move away from performative and move into acknowledging what really matters to us. What are the deeper needs that we really need to address that we're not addressing when we get stuck in that performative loop?
Mm-hmm. Yes, totally. And as we close, let this conversation serve as an invitation for every woman listening to reclaim your rhythm, to trust your biology, and to stop contorting yourself into systems never designed for your body. Regulation isn't about perfection, it's about partnership with your psychology. Take one small step today to honor what your nervous system is asking for. That one act of alignment may just change everything.